Stretch, make marks run. Let me start over again. Stretch marks run in the family, looking down at your growing, purpling stomach. You see your mother's pinkish gray ladder rungs no one's fingers would willingly climb, cracks in polar ice, streaks of soapy water dried on shower glass, riverbeds raw after a drought, a gathering of dimming stars, ripple where your son's nail slid your shoulder's blade. You love my imperfections, you say, the stria rising from your pelvis, pale stitches where you were never cut or sewn back together, where you expanded, then contracted down, a balloon or bulb or supernova, a body you are still in awe of. A pregnant body changes more in 9 months than most in their whole lifetime. Her uterus amasses 20 times its weight. Her blood turns darker blue, skin flays without breaking, rivers and rivers on her belly. It's bigger, your son digs his elbow to make a valley, apologizes to the flesh. I love your belly, he says, sees the marks, kisses anyway, takes his palm and ear to them. They're all your perfections, your husband tells you, and you look up where perfect comes from. Etymology, easier to bear than skin from Middle English and Old French. Parfait, finished, complete, brought to full development. But there's still so many rivers to grow, so many months to look more like your mother, to fight your body's generational becoming. Perfect. The tense, a retrospective present, connects a past occurrence with current one. Your stomach, a cosmos, constellations only beginning to glow, though its stars must have died long ago. Rivers and rivers for their light to trail down a mother's skin. Week 25, Rutabaga, a poem from 40 Weeks, the recent book of poems by our guest tonight, Julia Kolchinsky Dasbach. So, welcome. My name is Charles Carr, and welcome to Philly Loves Poetry, a collaboration between the Moonstone Art Center of Philadelphia and Philly Cam. The focus of our program is to give our audience the experience of the rich culture of poetry in the city of Philadelphia and the surrounding area. So tonight we have someone who lived in Philadelphia and who we still claim as a Philadelphia poet, and who many people have continued to follow, including myself, is Julia Kolchinsky Dasbach. Julia is the author of 3 poetry collections: 40 Weeks, which is published by Yes Yes Books in 2023, Don't Touch the Bones, published at Lost Horse Press in 2020, and the winner of the 2019 Idaho Poetry Prize, and The Many Names for Mother, winner of the Wick Poetry Prize, Kent State University Press, 2019, and finalist for the Jewish Book Award. Julia is currently working on a poetry collection, as well as a book of linked lyric essays, both of which grapple with with raising a neurodiverse child with a disabled partner under the shadow of the war in Ukraine, Julia's birthplace. Julia's poems have appeared in Poetry, Plowshares, American Poetry Review, The Nation, and AGNI, among others. Julia holds an MFA in poetry from the University of Oregon and a PhD in comparative literature and literary theory from the University of Pennsylvania. Julia is an assistant professor of English and creative writing at Denison University in Ohio. Welcome, Julia. It's great to see you, great to have you, and I'm glad we finally could work this out to have you on the show. So there's so much I want to discuss with you in the limited time that we have. Um, he, there's It's a fascinating book, and I think I said to you, I wrote to you that right off that the experience of this book, and this book is an experience, especially for a man, you know, is that it's messy in a good sort of way, in the reality of a woman giving birth to a child. Um, it's not overly scientific, uh, but it's just a wonderful experience to read this book. I went back and I reread it again, and there's just so many things that are details, and in the poem that I read, you talked about naming and the word perfect, and I found that throughout your work is that this fascination you have with words, the fascination you have with naming, and when I really thought to myself, I said most of what Julia is trying to do here is to name something that's extremely hard with our language to name and describe, and that's one of the fascinations, and you keep coming back to it, is that reality that we think we know and we think we name, but it falls short of the person who is actually experiencing this. So can you discuss that, that dimension of your work, this fascination that you have with words and etymology, which you use um, perfectly in your poems? I mean, one doesn't feel you're kind of beating us over the head with lessons on what these words mean. It's an education, and that's, I think, part of what poetry should be for to the reader.
I appreciate that deep and close reading so much. And, you said I'm always a Philly poet. Philly is always in my heart. I miss Philly so much. It's, I think, the first city, and so far the only one that I've ever loved. I moved here and I was like, I love it. So naming, it's something that I think has been my fascination throughout all of my work. Many Names for Mother, my first book, is all about naming and trying to figure out how to put trauma into words. With Many Names for Mother, it's particularly the trauma that I did not experience. It's the trauma of my uh, grandmother and great grandmother back in the Soviet Union during the Holocaust. How to put into words an experience that they lived that I feel very inscribed into within my own body. And that, as while writing Many Names for Mother, I was pregnant with my older child, that I felt like I was inscribing him into this experience of trauma.
Yeah.
How to name that. And what I've discovered in all of my attempts at naming is that, even with kind of the English language at my disposal, the Russian language, bits of Ukrainian, Yiddish, the closer we think we get to definition, the farther we actually are from the experience. And when I was traveling around the death sites in Poland, I met this nun who had moved there because she said I had so many questions about how could this happen. And I thought that moving here, working at a monastery just outside of Auschwitz, that she would find answers. And she said, the longer you study the Holocaust, the more you are left with questions rather than answers. And so I feel that very much within my poems as well, is that the closer we try to get, right, at naming, at definition, at an answer to something, the more questions we have. And with 40 weeks, I was trying to hold on to the present so much because I was being pulled in so many directions of caretaking. Um, and so for me, this kind of naming became a way of bridging my very visceral present with the intergenerational aspect, with the future, and still finding the same thing that language, even though it's all we have at our disposal, isn't capacious enough, isn't close enough to the body, that really all we still have is the body, the experience. And that doesn't mean we should stop trying to put it into language. In fact, we should keep trying, and make that failure transparent. I think that that's what I do in 40 weeks very much. It's messy, in a very intentional way, that
Mhm.
I want to make the failure of putting this experience into language transparent. Um,
I'm going to back up a little bit because something, I just hopped into this talking about naming. The way the book is structured, of course, it's the 40 weeks, and each poem has a week, but along with that week, there is the use of these seeds and fruits as as a way as a way into these poems.
mhm,
And I mean, in many cases, you expand on that from your own experience, from your family's experience. I can remember the one poem about the fig when you talked about, your father and as a boy in a fig tree, which was really fascinating. So why did you use that? That where did that come from? That to use that structure?
So, for those who have been pregnant within the last 20 years,
Uh-huh.
you can sign up, to get these emails through Baby Center, or there's many other websites. And each week you get an email, and it tells you your baby is currently the size of a kumquat, and this is what it can now do. Um, and they're delightful and coy, but also a little bit problematic in the way that they objectify, in the way that they gender the body. And I felt that throughout, you know, my experience with pregnancy, but just my experience as a body, as a, female body walking through the world, that we're constantly objectified and wrongly named.
Mhm.
And so I wanted to kind of take ownership over that naming, and reclaim it. And, again, point to the ways that these fruits and nuts do not name the body, do not name the life beginning to grow. And even in the early poems, I talk about the way that it's not a human yet. It's something beginning to grow. And rereading these poems, in the post Roe v. Wade
Oh,
world that we're in, and now I'm in Ohio. I got to go vote
okay.
today for the first time. Um, they feel even more urgent in the way that um, they are about the experience of pregnancy, but one that is very much chosen,
Mhm.
um, and one that I think argues for that choice, right? Either for or against it. That it is always a choice. That we have a choice over our bodies, over what to do with our bodies. Um, so in rereading them, I really feel that in these poems.
So the other fascinating thing that I found, in addition to that, and in it in so many ways of how you know unfold these poems to us from that prompt of a cantaloupe or a fig or whatever it is,
Mhm.
it is fascinating. Is your use of styles? I mean, the poem that I read, Rutabaga, um, uses colons, throughout. And there's other styles that you have used. And it seems that they seem to be more grouped at the beginning. And when we come to the end, there's more straight forward, unfiltered, or uncomplicated kind of style where it seems to be kind of straight narrative. But why the use of those different forms, and how did you feel that they served the poem and the book?
So with the colon in particular, it was a way of, talking about equating things. Equating one thing is like something, but not quite. So it was a way of grouping things through a loose metaphorical connection, but also showing the way that they are disparate, right? Um, and I use that colon, in Rutabaga. I think I use it in the central poems of the book. Rutabaga is like the core poem of the book, I think. And then I use it in the opening poem that I'll read, Nature Must Be a Mother. And then I use it in week 39, which is the longest poem. And it's the poem of giving birth.
Yeah.
And, um, I think that the colons are a way of showing that kind of failure of language that I talked about, of making it transparent and of showing that one thing isn't really like another, right? That the baby's not actually a watermelon. So
Mm.
even within week 39, which is called watermelon, I put a colon between the word water and melon. And the whole poem is all about water, and all about our bodies being made of water. Um, the
Yeah.
other thing I wanted to follow up on that I
Sure.
didn't say is part of the reason why, in addition to, being intellectual and thoughtful about objectifying the body, and that's why I use these fruits, it was also a very real choice to have a starting place to write. I find that when life is really overwhelming, it's hard to sit down and stare at a blank page. But I these having these fruits and nuts and seeds was already a prompt. It was already a way in. So to the writers listening, I'm a big proponent of prompts and of using kind of the same title over and over again
Mhm.
as a way of getting you into the poem. And then you can always change it later. You can always take out what doesn't serve you. But it's so great to have a way in.
Well, even in the poem that I read, the use of the colons for me as a reader was helpful. In other words, there's so many poems is you don't know what the poet artist really wanted as far as the pace of the poem to be read. And I mean, I don't want to get too esoteric here, but it really helped me with the pacing of the poem, and from short, crisp to longer lines, it really worked fine. And just going back to something that you talked about, I was struck by this in week 33 in your poem Pineapple at the end, if I may, how easy it is to be so wrong in naming what you've never carried. She is not a vine trailing scrambler yet, spreading as she clings to soil. For now, she's still reaching for the sun atop a tall palm, still hardening, bones in her skull, just starting to overlap, preparing for descent. She's only a pineapple. I really thought this was such a. I mean, there's so many glorious lines, but I absolutely love that. And that was really in response. Well, maybe it wasn't a response to somebody else who was trying to characterize, from a physical standpoint, where you are in the stages of your pregnancy.
It absolutely was. It happened right in Gray's Ferry outside of the fresh grocer.
Uh,
That that's or the Hello, whatever the new one was, the
right.
giant. Yeah, I walked out and someone said that to me as soon as I walked out. They said, "Looks like you stole one of their watermelons."
Yeah.
And I was so angry.
Yeah, there
Um,
is a lot of that correction of what people say to you, especially men, of course. And once again, that comes back to why I think this book is so important, because it really does bring you in a much closer, much intimate way in what it means over that span. And even in the book, you have weeks where you have nothing. You have a prompt, you have a fruit, and what it says, to me is this must have been a tough 2 or 3 weeks,
mhm.
and that's real. And I thought that was not clever. I just thought, yeah, this is real. I mean, this is you're going to hit those times when you're not going to be able to write.
Yeah. and for me, that's why this book was the easiest to revise. I'm a big reviser. I really write and rewrite poems. But with these, I didn't, because I didn't feel it was genuine to the experience, and I didn't feel it was genuine kind of to the conceit of the book. So even the poems that there were, I think, two that my editor said, these are weaker. You should do something with them. And I said, these were weaker weeks. That's all I had in me, and that's all I
Right.
want to be on the page, right? Whether
Yeah.
it's nothing or whether it's that show of incompleteness, right? That show of this is all I got, and that's already a lot. In addition to carrying life, taking care of a disabled partner, and taking care of a younger child. It was all a lot. This was my act of self care. Writing these poems was my way of taking care of myself, of putting the focus back on my own body and on my own identity as a writer, um, and really holding on to it.
And it comes through that there's a spontaneity there that you don't really feel. You feel that this has happened at this moment. Julia's captured where she is in herself, in her own reality right now. And it might not sound, a certain way to somebody else, another woman, another person, another poet, whatever. But there is this real there's a genuineness and a spontaneity that one feels as they read it, that this is real. This is what the week was like. And the other thing, and of course it came up in the poem I read, and that is the generational piece.
Mhm.
Your very strong attachment to your generation, to your ancestry, to your homeland in Ukraine, and it works throughout. And can you talk about that, because that's very much in your other books as well, and I think it's very educational for people. And I first met you really when you had really been a key actor in this whole initiative following that terrible tragedy in Pittsburgh of
Mhm.
the slaughter of people in their own synagogue.
Mhm.
And you responded to that with other poets uh, in that way. But this connection that you have, and the way it so strongly comes across in your poetry.
Yes, my dear partner in crime slash in activism, Olga Livshin, who's still in Philly. Um, she and I had our, From Across the Water series of refugees and allies, because it wasn't just an attack on Jews. It was an attack on immigrants and refugees, on Highest, which helps immigrants and refugees from all over. And so we really galvanized around that. Um, and then later with the series that I run, Words Together, Worlds Apart, that is going to be starting back up again. Stay tuned. It's a virtual reading.
Mhm.
It will be starting back up. Um, with Olga's help and with the help of other amazing poets like Ilya Kaminsky and Carolyn Forche, after, a week after the war in Ukraine began, a week after bombs began to fall, we held a giant Voices for Ukraine virtual reading where there were 800 people watching live. And
Yeah, I was one of them.
yeah, it was
Yeah,
incredible,
yeah.
there were poets in Ukraine reading. And so, for me, it's just, it's a calling, home. Where I come from, um, both my, immigration from Ukraine and the fact that we came as Jewish refugees. It's fascinating to look at 40 Weeks as my kind of least Jewish book, least overtly Jewish, because I only say it once. I only say it in one poem, and I only mention Ukraine in two poems. And maybe that makes it my kind of most Jewish and most inherently, Ukrainian American book, because it's a book where I almost don't feel like I have to restate that identity. It's
Mhm.
in every poem. Like you said, it's just such a central part of my writing and of who I am, um, and something I've accepted.
Another aspect of this, and what makes it so fascinating, is that the book and the poems don't let go of the bigger picture of what's happening outside of your wound in the world. I mean, in week 39 in labor, you remind us of the threats to the environment, polar ice caps, rising sea level, whales choking on plastic, and you challenge words and language the way perhaps, once again, reality fails. And I came upon an interview that you gave to Catherine Pratt Fontenhauer. I don't think I'm saying her name, regarding your fascination again with words. And I really loved your answer. It says, perhaps etymology is another attempt at care for others and the self, a way for us to realize our own limitations and not be so hard on ourselves for them, as they are a part of our humanity, just as language and all its failing is what makes us human. And um, and even the word human, I mean, it's things that you really question, this word human, uh, in terms of why, you know, why, why women, why a woman, a human being, has to go through these stages for birthing, and you really get people thinking on a much higher level about this.
And I'll just say too, not just women, but why a body with a uterus? Because I really, as I was, pregnant, um, thinking a lot about that and thinking about um, other uh, humans in the world who identify as male and who have given birth as well. That this isn't just a women's issue; it is a body issue. It is a human issue.
Mhm.
Um, and I really, thought about that too, in the way of naming, in the way of gendering, in the way of, um, this need to know the sex. This, I write about it in a poem that it was like I had that, need, and as I was having it, I was questioning it within myself. So it's such a human experience, and I appreciate that you've kind of inhabited it in reading the book as close as it can be inhabited. Um, but no matter our body, we all came from a uterus some way,
Mhm. Mhm.
and so it is in fact the thing that unites us the most is that we were all born of a body, of
Mhm.
another human's body. Um, and so I'm trying to make sense of that, of our connection, right? Rather than what separates us. How can we look at what binds bodies together? Um, what helps us understand one another rather than what divides us from each other?
Well, this has been a fascinating discussion. We could go on much longer, but people want to hear you read your poems, and so I'm going to just give you the floor here, and for you to read, discuss your poems. I'm really looking forward to it, because I've heard you read before, and so the floor is yours, the time is yours, and I think it's been a great discussion. I much appreciate you coming on Philly Loves Poetry.
Thank you so much. So I thought I would begin with kind of the poem that is a early prequel to this book. So I'm going to begin with a poem from my first book, The Many Names for Mother, and it's the poem of giving birth to my son, and having my mother be in the delivery room. Um, and you'll see as I read the poem why I think it's an important kind of prequel to 40 Weeks, because it's a poem about me being, my mother's only child, her daughter. And it's from a series of poems called Other Women Don't Tell You. Because as I was writing this first book, also pregnant, this was my obsession is that, oh, there's so much that others just don't talk about. So many taboos that are still taboo and still right now. I'm just not comfortable talking about. Other women don't tell you what your mother will say just after he is born, after they slap him onto your stomach like a wet rag, the tether binding you still warm and pulsing. And just as you look down, expecting blood, they don't tell you sometimes it isn't there. The flesh almost clean, dark moss of hair covered by a thin white film, a second skin, a part of you still holding on to him, perhaps. He looks like an alien, she explained, giddy with becoming. But they tell her she's too young to be a grandmother, and she is happier for it. Are his ears going to stay like this? As if she'd never given birth herself, though she reminded you she has. Just hours earlier, your belly rising like a moving mountain as she recalled how back in the old country she was stitched up with nothing for the pain. The young male nurse responded to her screams. Does it really hurt that bad? And they tell you that it does, that it's unbearable, but you will bear it, that it's a mountain and drowning, that it's all worth it in the end. They don't tell you when the pain really comes, when it moves through you, a rush of snowmelt pouring boulders on the side of the road, and everyone stopping to look, that a small part of you will love the feeling. The intent to grind as though you were chewing stones, the want to bear the way centuries have, bare and unbroken by the bearing, like the women who didn't tell you any of this. Your grandmother or hers, holding each other, hands and boiling water and sopping towels and feeling everything, only to never speak about their pain, to continue having girls, to raise them so they know to let their mothers be a part of everything, to understand your mother when she tells you your tiny body hurt her bad enough to never want to want. And so then I'll move on to the opening poem of 40 Weeks, which is the only poem, well, the opening poem that's not named after a fruit. Um, and it's called Nature Must Be a Mother. And opening with this poem kind of drove me to think a lot about the environment and the kind of global crisis that we are in as I kept, you know, feeling a storm within my own body. There were so many storms going on outside. So this is nature must be a mother to pour thunder, punch through potholes, hoping this will make something, anything grow. She must be moths, mouth wide, wings panting for lightning. Who else would strike herself? Flame veining the air. Who else would bear children to rise in spring, only to feel them cut months later? The moth's charred outline on a log, the double wound, her children's heads sinking, left to dry on another mother's windowsill. Who else would ask for such a violence? Um, and then I'll go on because I talked about it and read my one overtly Jewish poem in the book. And it mentions an experience that I had as a child in Ukraine. This is week 9. Great. Louse, the singular form of lice, small, wingless, you'd never heard of because you never find just one. Like the note from your son's school saying, one girl has them and she's been treated, and you should check every tangle of your son's curls to make sure some haven't found their way inside. And another mother says she'd buzz it all off just to be safe. Says he's a boy, so he'll look tougher anyway. And you recall how you were 3 then too when your parents nearly shaved you. And the other children wouldn't share the bench, would run away and yell and point, would laugh how you were ruined, infected, dirty, a louse, Jewish. So you'll refuse to cut his hair and scour each perfect ringlet, twist their multitudes around your fingers. And when you find only more locks, you'll tell him to sit with Evelyn tomorrow to remind her she is beautiful and loved.
Mm.
Um, so continuing on my kind of obsession to write about my mother and turn to her, I'm going to read a poem that addresses that, and also the super moon and all these amazing moons we've been having this month. I think we're having 2 super moons. It's a blue, once in a blue moon. So we already had one, and now at the end of the month we're going to have one. So this is week 14, lemon. The year's full moon is ruled by your mother, the deacon Cancer, Cancer of cancers, emotion, rock dripping in reflected light, no glow without the sun. I have nothing to live for, she repeats, without you. Phases wax and wane, the tired, even dead metaphor, maternal guilt. Do you even miss me? The sea of tranquility, longing for the possibility of water, the crater for the ice or stone that bore it, the light, always for more light. Your mother for the body she gave you, the one she regrets letting cleave from hers, for your chests full milk and bellies showing lemon glow, for the way you used to scream at being touched by strangers, until your mom discovered lemons, let you suck the rind and pulp, your mouth dripping equal parts acid and shine, while the doctor worked on fixing your bowing thighs and fear. So now you're not afraid of anyone with the moon in your mouth. She regrets this most of all. December moon, cold moon, oak moon, long night moon, rising past the solstice, deceiving you both about the balance of light, refusing to be named womb. So I'm going to pause with 40 weeks and read a poem from my in progress work, because it follows suit on this obsession with the moon. And I think so many poets or just people are obsessed with the moon. And so I wrote this series of poems called Why Write Another Poem About the Moon, where I wrote lots and lots of moon poems. Because I think I discovered that, similar to parenthood, particularly my experience of motherhood, it's something that moon up there is constantly pulling, constantly controlling the tides, constantly drawing our gaze to look up in wonder. And even when it's not there, right? We don't always see it. And I feel that way about motherhood too, that I'm constantly pulled by it, by my identity and connection to my children, even if I'm apart from them. So this is one of the Why Write Another Poem About the Moon poems. And I feel like I have to read it because the new Barbie movie is all the craze right now. I haven't seen it, but it's a poem about my first Barbie and what my son did with it. Why write another poem about the moon when my son is surrounded by the severed heads of Barbies I spent a decade loving, but haven't touched for 3 of his lifetimes? How long after he ran his fingertips so gently across their hair did he tear the plastic skulls from their torso trunks and leave them naked like birch branches from my childhood, stripped of bark by summer thunderstorm, and strewn so far, who knows what tree they once belonged to? The doll I carried across the Atlantic is hit the worst, her pelvis cracked in half and head missing altogether. Its mess of dirty curl just like his own, and eyes too much like mine. Moons, he says. They look like hairy moons. My son, their son, and I am terrified for every woman, every moon he longs to touch. Okay, let's go back to 40 weeks. And um, let's go back to global calamity because there's a lot of terrible stuff happening to the environment. And if you'll recall in 2019, when I was working on this book, um, the the Notre Dame Cathedral burned. There was just so many fires and things happening. So this is week 30, large cabbage. Tornado warnings and 400 bolts of lightning touched down, and 5,000 people are out of power, and cranes are pulling trees out of the water, and from the bridge they look like battered bodies, and Notre Dame is on fire, and one of its spires has already fallen, and unborn skin is cells finding their pigments, and the fluid around her shrinks as she grows. And tomorrow they will draw your blood over and over and collect 3 vials each time. And your veins will rise bluer, and your skin will change pigments and bruise plum, and your sugar levels likely spike, your hands going a little numb. And last night, thunder growled louder than your sun and flashed deer eyes in pitch dark, and you dreamt your water broke, and flooded streets wouldn't let you leave the house, and the dog rubbed her wetness against your hand, and your son cried a cyclone not to be left alone, and your belly shook a storm, and the basement flooded, and your husband slept through as nothing ran from your thighs. Um, so I wanted to read week 33 Pineapple because we talked about it and because it's such a fun poem to read and because it's all about, being catcalled, particularly by individuals in Philly. I found that Philly in its warmth, I feel like the intention isn't always bad. There was a lot of catcalling from women also in my neighborhood in South Philly in Point Breeze where I was. And it was just out of love sometimes, but that is not always the way it came across to me. So this is week 33, Pineapple. Every time she turns her head between your ilium and coxal bones, you feel your water about to break, afraid of that balloon pop in your pelvis, afraid break is wholly wrong for what shifts or tears, slips and loosens. Bones break, Hearts, maybe, but the veil between your body's end and her beginning, there's no breaking it. Looks like that baby is about to fall right out of you, the women call, holding tight to what's already fallen from inside them. All too wholly wrong for the way a body enters breathing. Rain falls, fruit from trees, but body from body, there must be more to describe such cleaving, directionless and unfinished. I'm going to report you to the grocery store, a man yells, passing. You stole one of their watermelons. How easy to be so wrong in naming what you've never carried. She is not a vine trailing scrambler yet, spreading as she clings to soil. For now, she's still reaching for the sun atop a tall palm, still hardening, bones in her skull just starting to overlap, preparing for descent. She's only a pineapple, you correct him, and keep on walking, one slow bone in front of the other, unsure which one of you is going where or how to name your joined, persistent motion. So I want to read a couple more poems from my new book project. Um, And this next one that I'm going to read was written on the first day that bombs began to fall on Kiev. Um, and I was living at Arkansas at the time. And on February 24th, 2022, there was an ice storm in Arkansas. And so my kids were home from school watching TV. And it's a poem about them watching a Russian show called Masha and the Bear, which some of you may have seen. It's available on Netflix in English. And it's about them watching this in Russian, in my mother tongue, Russian. But I'm from Ukraine, and me listening to the news, listening to what's happening in my birthplace. So this is watching Masha and Medved as Russia invades Ukraine. Mishka, nu Mishka, blares in Russian through one ear as CNN coverage of the first day missiles falling on my birthplace echoes through a blue earbud in the other. My children are on the couch drinking their morning milk and stuffing their mouths full of warm croissants, watching a blonde Slavic girl wrap a giant bear around her finger. Mishka, she tenderly calls, little bear, and he reluctantly does whatever is asked. Prepares elaborate meals of kashas with dried fruits and homemade cherry, currant, gooseberry preserves, and stroganoffs and stews and smoked fish and 5 kinds of potatoes. And if she but whispers in her small, high pitched voice, Mishka, he will carry her and a menagerie of animals in his big, bare arms across a swamp and field of sunflowers to safety. More missiles fall on Kiev. The airport in the city I was born is bombed. I don't remember it. My Dnipro, the home where I collected chestnuts by the Dnieper River, or ate small spheres of ice cream from a shop called Pingvin, or held my mother's hand when the streets flooded and she lifted me up to walk the rim of rusted fountains. Incoming call from Dom, meaning home, interrupts the news. Mama tells me she finally reached her childhood friend. They spoke as shells fell, and maybe Marina could see fires through her window. My mother never thought this would happen. None of us did. The subway stations turned bomb shelters. The way they were in the war, her parents lived through, and grandparents died fighting. Not while there are still those alive to remember, she said. How could he do this while they are still alive? She repeats it to her mother over tea and tears and disbelief. They thought they'd never have to endure it again. Ice falls in Arkansas. My children demand another snack and episode of Masha in their mother's tongue, my mother tongue. This mouthful of history we chew and chew until it chokes us. Um, so the next poem I'm going to read is kind of I guess, a follow up on that. And on that, in the beginning, I didn't really talk to uh, my kids about what was happening. I tried to process it and protect them from it. Um, and my son is neurodiverse. He's on the autism spectrum and incredibly intuitive, and also has, a real fascination with death and with the body, in a way that seems kind of too mature and at times grotesque for a kid his age. Um, and so this is a poem about that. I do not mention the war in my birthplace to my 6-year-old son, but somehow his body knows. My face in his hands before bed, he asks, if I cut you in half, will you be even? I am silent, expecting mothers in Mariupol are cut by invisible hands, children cut off from water. Because you have 2 eyes, plus 2 ears, plus 2 cheeks, plus so much hair, plus your mouth can have 2 halves, so you'd be even, right? He wants simple math, breath that outlasts violence. You divided by 2 equals 2 even yous. He isn't asking anymore. He is making me monument. You would still be if I cut you in half. Small hands demand a splitting. If you cut me in half, I tell him, I'd be dead. Um, so I'm going to read 2 more poems. I'm going to read one that I wrote on the anniversary, the 1-year anniversary of the war. And then I will read the last poem of 40 weeks, and I think we will be just about at time. And this poem, for the fans of form in the room, this is a villanelle, and it's my favorite poetic form, where there are 2 repeating refrains that repeat, in alternating fashions through tercets, through 3-line stanzas. And what I love about this poem is that it compresses, and it also forces those refrains to slightly shift in meaning each time they're repeated. And I felt like this was the only way that I could kind of respond a year after this terrible violence has been happening. And now it's more than a year and a half later. 1 year later, it's easy to look away from war when your wallet's empty and sink is full, when the land and people aren't yours, when your children scream for more of you, when your body's pulled. It's easy to look away from war. The soil across the water to Earth's core brims blood, but look, the sunflowers still bloom when the land and people aren't yours. So you focus on the daily chores, dig out a trench of laundry, linens, wools. It's easy to look away from war with the dog barking, mailman at the door. Your children speak a stranger's tongue at school. The land and people aren't yours. How does a house become a shore no news can reach? Are we that cruel? Or is it just that easy to look away from war when the land and people aren't yours? And so I'm going to end with what I hope is a slightly uplifting poem. And it's called Why Have Children When the World is Ending? Because there's so many, terrible things happening. And so it's a poem that, if it's not hopeful, it at least reaches for hope. Why have children when the world is ending? Killer whales have stopped reproducing. Polar bears are eating their cubs. Koalas abandon their young, breathless, nose low, a brush to keep from choking on rising smoke. They run towards the thousands, pounds of food we airdropped where Earth stopped burning, or flames just hadn't reached yet. Guilt for our part in this end, or fear it would come for us the same. We tell ourselves everything just wants to survive. Believe in life as circle, not line. In karma, if it means our endurance. We spread stories about wombats herding animals into their burrows, kangaroos hugging their rescuers, or foxes feeding baby bears uncharred Kandai milk. But animals know to rely on no one. Their own scathed hides and carcasses pile the roadside along bus routes to the local preschool. The children we chose to have must fight, gagging at the smell. My infant daughter screams at us for plugging the bulb syringe deep into her nostril. She exhales snot mixed with my milk, screams again, then sleeps. She doesn't know we've made this quiet possible. She turns her head away where breathing comes easiest and reaches for a warm body as soon as she can smell it close. She doesn't know the coral reefs are dead and sargassum reeks in mounds along Caribbean coastline, starfish suffocated under its spreading. And maybe this is why we've made her, because she doesn't know survival is in our hands, forgives us their indiscretions, and lets us hold her as though she were a world we could still save.
Wow.
Thank you so much.
Wow. Well, thank you, Julia. It's really been wonderful having you, and your reading was really great. And thank you for kind of giving us a preview of your new work. That was really great. And so I want to thank you. I want to thank Aaron Phelan, who's been our technical director here. It really makes this all happen and keeps us up on the screen. And in leaving, I, of course, have to urge people that this is just one of the initiatives that Moonstone Arts brings to the cultural community of Philadelphia. And as I've been saying, Larry Robinson is really a cultural treasure of Philadelphia. And all I ask you is to reach out, is to support Moonstone Arts. We have a website. You can go there and you can make a donation. We can find about other things that you can support. Or if you're a poet, you can find out ways that maybe Moonstone can support you or even support you in publishing. We publish a lot of books, chapbooks, full-length books, and anthologies. So, and I'm so happy that we could sponsor this tonight. It's been another great broadcast. I am so fortunate. I am so fortunate to have these great poets month after month as my guest, and so it's a treat to me, and I'm surely it's a treat to our audience. So again, Julia, thank you and good luck, and stay in touch with us. You're still Philadelphia.
Always, always. My heart's forever in Philly. Thank you so much.
Okay. Good night.